Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our lecture on elasticity and its application. I'm sure you've had enough time to review part 1 of this lecture. So in this lecture, we'll still consider the scenario we treated in the first part. Here, there is a website designer who provides websites for local businesses. He charges $200 per website and currently sells 12 websites per month. Now, his cost is rising, and he's therefore thinking of raising the price to $250. Now, we noted that from the law of demand, he's not going to sell as many websites if he increases the price. And so then we are interested in knowing how many fewer websites he will be able to sell and how much his revenue will fall or might increase if price increases. And so we'll look at the effect of price elasticity on total revenue. Now, so continuing from this scenario, if he raises his price from $200 to $250, would his revenue rise or fall? Now, if we compute revenue by multiplying price by quantity, then you would note that price increase has two effects on revenue. The first one is that at a higher price, more revenue on each unit will be made on each unit he sells. However, he will sell fewer units because of the law of demand. And so, which of these two effects is bigger? And we will realize that it will depend on the price elasticity of demand. So once again, we will compute price elasticity of demand by dividing the percentage change in quantity by the percentage change in price. So let's take the different types of elasticity and analyze. So if demand is elastic, then price elasticity of demand is greater than 1. And so a percentage change in quantity will be greater than a percentage change in price. This means that the fall in revenue from the lower quantity demanded is greater than the increase in revenue from the higher price. So revenue will fall in effect. So now let's illustrate this on this diagram. So at a price of $200, quantity demanded is 12. So his total revenue is the $200 times the quantity demanded of 12. That brings us to total revenue of $2,400. Now, when he increases the price from $200 to $250, quantity demanded drops to 8. So now his total revenue declines to $2,000. And so there is a loss of revenue due to the lower quantity demanded. And of course, the increase in price increases revenue. So the net effect is that when demand is elastic, price increases cause revenue to fall. Let's look at another scenario where demand is inelastic. We would realize that the price elasticity of demand will be less than 1. And thus, the percentage change in quantity demanded will also be less than 1, will also be less than the percentage change in price. Therefore, the price in revenue from a lower quantity demanded will be smaller than the increase in revenue from a higher price. So revenue will rise in effect. So in our example, suppose that quantity only falls to 10 instead of 8 when you raise your price to $250, or when the website designer raises his price to $250. Now let's see the effect on this diagram. So we'll see that at the price of 200, the quantity demanded is 12. And so the revenue is $2,400. Now, when the price increases to $250, quantity is now 10. And as we can see, the revenue from this is now $2,500. Now, this $2,500 is obviously greater than the initial revenue. So what is the effect? We see that there's a loss of revenue due to a lower quantity, and then there's an increase in revenue due to the higher price. The net effect is that when demand is inelastic, a price increase causes revenue to fall. Sorry, causes revenue to rise. Now let's look at this active learning case. And we'll be looking at how elasticity affects expenditure and revenue. So in this case, you have pharmacies raise the price of insulin by 10%. And you are expected to tell us whether the total expenditure on insulin will rise or fall. B, as a result of a fair war, the price of a luxury cruise falls by 20%. Does the luxury cruise company's total revenue rise or fall? Now, these are the answers. So that when pharmacies raise the price of insulin by 10, does the total expenditure on insulin rise or fall? As total expenditure will be computed by multiplying the price by the quantity bought. And so since demand is inelastic for insulin, people with kidney issues have an inelastic demand for insulin, okay? And so insulin basically becomes a necessity, for which reason it becomes an inelastic commodity. So quantity will fall less than the 10%, so expenditure will rise. Now B, when the luxury cruise companies have their prices falling, we would compute their revenue by multiplying the price of the cruise by the quantity demanded. We see that a fall in price would reduce their revenue, but quantity would increase, which increases revenue. Which effect is bigger? Now, this is what will happen. Since demand is elastic, quantity will increase more than 20%. So revenue is going to rise for these luxury cruise companies. Now let's look at an application of the price elasticity of demand. In this case, we are looking at the issue of drug interdiction, and we want to know whether drug interdiction increases or decreases drug-related crime. So one side effect of illegal drug use is crime, and users often turn to crime to finance their habit, okay? So we would examine two policies designed to reduce illegal drug use and see what effects they have on drug-related crime. And for simplicity, we would assume the total dollar value or CD value of a drug-related crime equals total expenditure on drugs. We also assume that demand for illegal drugs is inelastic due to addiction issues. So on this diagram, it shows the demand and supply of drugs, illegal drugs in this case. So at P1, quantity demanded is Q1. Now, the area shaded red is the initial value of drug-related crime, okay? Now, when interdiction will reduce the supply of drugs, okay? Interdiction will reduce the supply of drugs. And so you see that our supply curve will move inward, okay? And when it moves inwards, we'll see that since demand for drugs is inelastic, the price is going to rise more proportionally than quantity will fall. So as you can see here, you can see that price increases from P1 to P2, and quantity demanded decreases from Q1 to Q2. So the result, in effect, is that an increase in total spending on drugs and in drug-related crime. So basically, the result is that there will be an increase in total spending on drugs and in drug-related crimes. Now, let's consider the second policy, which is education. So once again, you have your demand and supply curves for drugs. and the area shaded red is the initial value of drug-related crimes. Now, education, when given, will reduce the demand for drugs. Okay, so you realize that your demand curve will shift inwards from D1 to D2. The effect is that P and Q, which is price and quantity, is going to fall. So price is going to fall from P1 to P2. Quantity is also going to fall from Q1 to Q2. The result is that there will be a decrease in total spending on drugs and in drug-related crime. Now, price elasticity of supply is another important component we need to look at. The beauty of this is that it is not very different from the price elasticity of demand. It's just that in this case, we are looking at how supply, quantity supplied changes when the price of the item or good changes. Okay, so price elasticity of supply would measure how quantity supply responds to a change in price. And we'll say that, again, we are going to use a midpoint approach to compute the percentage changes. Okay, so let's look at this example. When price increases from P1 to P2 by 8%, quantity rises by 16%. And this happens because of the law of supply, that more will be supplied at a higher price. Now, what is the price elasticity of supply? Now, it will be the change in quantity supplied by the change in price. So the change in quantity is 16, the change in price is 8. So 16 divided by 8 is 2. And then again, just like the demand curves, there are a variety of supply curves we will be interested in looking at. So once again, economists classify supply curves according to their elasticity. And the slope of the supply curve is closely related to the price elasticity of supply. So the rule of thumb here will be that the flatter the curve, the bigger the elasticity. And the steeper the curve, the smaller the elasticity. So the next 5 slides will present different classifications from the least to the most elastic. So let's look at the first one, which is the perfectly inelastic supply curve. So from this diagram, we can see that for the perfectly inelastic supply curve, the curve is vertical and the seller's price sensitivity is 0, in the sense that when prices changes, quantity supplied is the same. And so elasticity is 0. So as we can see from this example, when price changes from P1 to P2 by 10%, quantity supplied changes by 0%. And 0 divided by 10 is 0. The second supply curve we look at is the inelastic supply curve. This curve is relatively steep, as we can see here. Price sensitivity is relatively low. And so we'll realize that the elasticity of supply is less than 1. So let's look at an example. When price increases from P1 to P2 by 10%, quantity supplied rises less than 10%. And so that leaves us with a price elasticity of less than 1%. The third supply curve is the unit or the unitary elastic supply curve. Now, this type of curve is what we refer to as the intermediate curve or slope. And the price elasticity is intermediate, and it will be equal to 1. And this example will help us understand this better. So when price rises from P1 to P2 by 10%, quantity rises by the same percentage of 10%. And so we'll see that 10% divided by 10% will leave us with a price elasticity of 1. Then the fourth supply curve is an elastic supply curve. So this type of curve is relatively flat. Price sensitivity is relatively high, and the price elasticity is greater than 1, as we'll see in this example. So when price increases from P1 to P2 by 10%, we can see that quantity rises by more than 10%. And so we would end up with a price elasticity greater than 1. And then the last one is a perfectly elastic supply curve. And this type of curve is horizontal, and it is horizontal because at a fixed price, different quantities will be supplied by different suppliers. And so we would say that this type of supply elasticity is infinity. So if P changes by 0, quantity changes by any percentage. And so the end result in terms of price elasticity of supply is infinity. Now, just as we got to know of the determinants of the demand elasticity, we'd also want to know what the determinants of supply elasticity are. So we know that the more easily sellers can change the quantity they produce, the greater the price elasticity of supply. So an example is that the supply of beachfront property is harder to vary and thus less elastic than the supply of new cars. So for many goods, price elasticity of supply is greater in the long run than in the short run, because firms can build new factories, or new firms may be able to enter the market. At this moment, I want us to look at this active learning. And here we want to look at the how elasticity and changes affects changes in equilibrium. So the supply of beachfront property, as we have noted earlier on, is inelastic. The supply of new cars is elastic. So suppose population growth causes demand for both goods to double. At each price, quantity demanded doubles. Now, which product will price change the most? And for which product will quantity change the most? So let's look at the demand and supply curve for the beachfront property, which we have assumed to be an inelastic or faces an inelastic supply curve. So we can see that at P1, quantity supplied is Q1. So when supply is inelastic, an increase in demand has a bigger impact on the price of the quantity. And so when demand increases, it means that demand moves outward. We would see that this is going to have an effect on price. Price will increase from P1 to P2, and hence the quantity supplied would also increase from Q1 to Q2. Now, what is the effect of an increase in demand for new cars? Now, we'll see that at P1, quantity supplied is Q1. So when supply is elastic, we'll see that an increase in demand has a bigger impact on quantity than on price. So once again, when demand increases, the demand curve will move outward to D2. We would see that the quantity supply will increase more than the changes in price from P1 to P2. So how the price of elasticity of supply can vary. Now, supply often becomes less elastic as quantity rises due to capacity challenges or capacity limits. So in this diagram, we have seen the supply curve. Now, at a price of $3, quantity supplied is 100. At 4, 200 is supplied. Now you can see that elasticity of supply in this instance is greater than 1, because more is supplied than the changes in price. Now, when the price is $12, quantity supplied is 500. And when it gets to $15, quantity supplied is just 525. at this point, we can realize, or we can see, that the elasticity of supply is less than 1. So along the same supply curve, we can see that elasticity of supply can vary. Now, there are other types of elasticities of supply we are interested in. And the other type we want to look at now is the income elasticity of supply, which measures the response of the quantity demanded to a change in quantity in consumer supply. Now, we'd also measure income elasticity of demand by dividing the percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in income. So an increase in income will normally cause an increase in the demand for normal goods. Hence, for normal goods, income elasticity will be greater than 0. For inferior goods, as we noted in class, income elasticity will be less than 1. And then the second other type of elasticity we are interested in is what we refer to as a cross-price elasticity of demand or supply, which measures the response of demand or supply for one good to changes in the price of another good. So, i.e., if the price of toothpaste increases, how would the quantity demanded of toothbrushes be? So, we'll compute the cross-price elasticity of demand or supply by dividing the percentage change in quantity demanded or supply for the good one by the percentage change in the price of the second good. So these are the things we need to note about this. For substitutes, cross-price elasticity will be greater than 0. An example is an increase in price of beef causes an increase in demand for chicken. And then for complements, the cross-price elasticity is less than 0. And the example is that an increase in price of computers, for example, will cause a decrease in demand for software. Now, this brings us to the end of our lecture on elasticity and its application. At this point, I'd like to summarize this lecture. So we noted that elasticity measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded or supply to one of its determinants. We looked at price, income, and then the price of other goods. So price elasticity of demand equals the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. When it's less than 1, demand is inelastic. When it's greater than 1, demand is elastic. When demand is inelastic, we realize that total revenue rises when price rises. When demand is elastic, total revenue falls when price rises. We also noted that demand is less elastic in the short run for necessities, for broadly defined goods, or for goods with few close substitutes. We also realized that price elasticity of supply equals the percentage change in the quantity supply divided by the percentage change in price. When it's less than 1, supply is inelastic. When it's greater than 1, supply is elastic. And so price elasticity of supply is greater in the long run than in the short run. We also looked at the income elasticity of demand, which we said measures how much quantity demanded responds to changes in the buyer's income. And we also looked at the cross-price elasticity of demand, which measures how much demand for one good responds to changes in the price of another good. So thank you for your attention, and we look forward to our next lecture on as given in the course guide. Bye.